Hey everyone, today's deep dive is all about, it's about tackling this challenge we all face. How do you build neural networks that don't fall apart when things get complex? We're going to be looking at Kolmogorov-Arnold Networks, CONs for short. And for good reason, they offer a really fresh perspective on this whole problem.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting is that they're not just some abstract theoretical idea. I mean, we've got research here showing CANs are already making waves in all sorts of fields, from mathematics to physics.
Okay, so let's set the stage here. We both know those traditional neural networks, those multi-layer perceptrons, they can really struggle when things get too complicated. Too many inputs, too many layers. It's like that curse of dimensionality, right?
Exactly. It's like, trying to predict the weather by analyzing a million butterflies flapping their wings. Each input adds this whole other layer of complexity, and eventually, even the most powerful MLP just hits a wall.
Right, the network becomes this tangled mess and forget trying to figure out what's actually going on inside.
Exactly, and that's where CANs come in, with, I think, a really elegant solution. And it's all thanks to a little bit of mathematical magic called the Kolmogorov-Arnold representation theorem.
Okay, I'll admit, when I first saw theorem in the title, I was ready to be confused, but this one's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, it really is. So this theorem basically says that any continuous function, doesn't matter how complex it is, can be broken down into a combination of much simpler single variable functions, all glued together with addition.
So it's kind of like, I don't know, you can build any Lego masterpiece using only those simple little bricks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Canadians, they take this idea and they just run with it. So instead of these massive interconnected webs of neurons, they simplify things by using this single variable building block approach.
So how does that actually play out in the structure of a CAN? The research mentioned something about activation functions being in a different place in a CAN than they are in an MLP. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, you've hit on a key difference there. So think back to those MLPs for a second. The activation functions, those are like the little decision points. They live on the nodes themselves. But in a CAN, they're on the edges connecting the nodes.
So instead of those connections being passive pathways, they're actually actively shaping the data as it moves through the network.
You got it. It's like each connection in a CAN is like a mini function in its own right, adding its own little twist to the information as it flows through.
And because those mini functions are built on this Kolmogorov-Arnold theorem, CANs have this knack for representing these really complex relationships in a way that's just more elegant.
Yeah, elegant, that's a good word for it. It's true, and this elegance isn't just theoretical, it leads to real-world gains in efficiency too. Remember that curse of dimensionality we talked about? Well, CANs can sometimes just sidestep that whole mess.
Okay, so less data, less compute power, faster training times. I'm starting to see the appeal here, but what really caught my eye were these research papers showing CANs being used for some pretty mind-blowing applications, unlocking new insights in mathematics and physics, right?
Absolutely, and this is where it gets even cooler. So in one study, researchers, they took a data set of knot invariants, and they just threw it at a CAN. Now, these aren't your everyday Boy Scout knots. We're talking about those tangled up in space kind of knots that mathematicians love.
Right, those make my head spin just thinking about them. What does a CAN have to do with that?
Well, it turns out there are all of these hidden relationships between different knot properties, and they're really hard for us humans to wrap our heads around. But a CAN, with its knack for spotting patterns, it can just cut right through the noise.
So the CAN is like a mathematical detective sniffing out clues that we might miss.
Exactly. And get this, they tested the CAN in two modes. Supervised, where you tell it what to look for, and unsupervised, where you basically just say, go wild, see what you find.
I like the sound of unsupervised, very adventurous. What happened?
Well, in supervised mode, the CAN aced it. It predicted a knot property called the signature, based on other properties. But here's the kicker. Through its interpretability, which we'll get to in a bit, it actually highlighted the key properties influencing the signature. Things even the mathematicians hadn't picked up on.
Hold on, so the CAN wasn't just crunching numbers, it was pointing out specific connections that led to a deeper understanding of the math.
Exactly, and it gets wilder. In unsupervised mode, with no guidance whatsoever, the CAN rediscovered these known relationships between knot properties. So for example, it found a link between a knot's volume and how it shifts in space.
So even on its own, the CAN was digging up these meaningful insights, like it had developed some kind of mathematical intuition.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? But before we get too lost in the theoretical weeds here, let's talk about that other fascinating application you mentioned, Anderson localization.
Ah, yes, the quantum traffic jam. I do love a good physics problem. Refresh my memory, though. What exactly is Anderson localization?
Okay, so imagine electrons. They're trying to move through a material, but it's like they're stuck in a maze and the walls are constantly shifting. That's Anderson localization in a nutshell. Disorder causing these electrons to get trapped.
Right, and understanding this whole trapped electron problem, that's important for all sorts of tech, from better solar cells to faster computers, right?
Absolutely. Now, this is where cans come in. Researchers used them to study these different models of Anderson localization, and they were able to really accurately predict something called the mobility edge.
Mobility edge, that sounds important.
It is. Think of it as the dividing line between the localized or stuck electrons and the free-flowing ones, like the edge of a dance floor. On one side, everyone's grooving. On the other side, they're stuck at the snack table.
So the can acted as a sort of quantum bouncer, figuring out who gets to dance and who's stuck on the sidelines.
In a way, yes. It pinpointed that critical energy threshold, that mobility edge, with, like I said, really impressive accuracy.
That's remarkable. But did they just, feed the can a bunch of data and just hope for the best?
Not quite. They cleverly wove in some of their existing knowledge about Anderson localization into the can structure. They were sort of guiding it toward the solution.
Okay, so it was a true collaboration. Like the physicists were whispering little hints to the can along the way.
Exactly. And this is what sets cans apart from a lot of other AI approaches. It's this iterative dance between human intuition and machine learning that makes them so powerful.
So it's not just about replacing scientists with AI, it's about giving them this powerful new partner in the lab.
Yeah.
Someone or something to bounce ideas off of.
You got it. And this is where things get really exciting.
Because on top of all of this, there's another layer to cans that has me particularly intrigued. Their interpretability. I mean, we've touched on it, but I think it deserves its own moment in the spotlight.
Oh, absolutely. Interpretability is where cans really shine. It's this feature that has the potential to completely change the game.
Because it's one thing for an AI to spit out an answer. It's a whole other thing to understand how it got there. With those traditional neural networks, it's like they're speaking a different language, one that we can't decipher.
Exactly. They're black boxes. But with cans, we have a chance to peek behind the curtain, to understand the reasoning behind the results. And the papers we're looking at, they actually lay out some really cool techniques for making sense of trained cans.
Okay, hit me with it. What kind of techniques are we talking about?
Well, one really cool technique is called sparsification.
Sparsification sounds intense.
It's actually simpler than it sounds. Imagine you've got this big, intricate web of connections in your trained can. Sparsification is like taking a pair of pruning shears to that web. You're trimming away the less important connections and leaving only the most essential ones behind.
So it's like decluttering the network, highlighting the key players in the decision-making process.
Exactly. And this can lead to some really surprising insights. Like in that knot theory study, sparsification revealed that for predicting those knot signatures, only 3 other properties were crucial.
Only 3? Out of how many?
They started with a whole bunch.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, the mathematicians hadn't realized those 3 were so important before. The can, through sparsification, was like, hey, pay attention to these guys.
That's wild. It's like the can was whispering these secrets of the universe that we were just missing.
Right. And then there's another technique, visualization, that takes this interpretability to a whole other level.
Okay, I'm all about a good visualization. Give me the details.
So remember we talked about those activation functions, how they live on the edges in a can. Well, with visualization, you can literally see those edges. And their transparency, it reflects how important they are. It's like a network map where the busiest pathways light up.
So you get this intuitive visual guide to what's going on inside the can's head. Which parts are doing the heavy lifting?
Exactly. And it gets even better. Remember how those mini functions in a can are based on these simple, recognizable building blocks? Well, the research actually describes techniques for automatically identifying those building blocks after the can is trained.
Hold on, are you saying the can might stumble upon, say, a sine wave or exponential function within this mess of data?
Right. Exactly. It's like you feed in this jumble of numbers and the can says, hey, I think this chunk over here, this looks a lot like a cosine function. And they call this symbolization, replacing those identified chunks with their actual mathematical symbols.
Okay, that's just straight up mind-blowing. It's like the can is translating its internal logic into a language that we can actually understand.
It really is. And that's what makes this whole interpretability thing so game-changing. We're not just stuck with these opaque predictions anymore. We have the potential to really, truly understand what the AI is learning.
And to be fair, I think, some folks, they might be a little wary of all this AI talk, right? But what I'm hearing is that KNs aren't about replacing scientists. They're about giving scientists a powerful new tool.
Right. Think of it like the invention of the telescope. It didn't replace astronomers. If anything, it gave them a way to see further, to make discoveries they couldn't have even dreamed of before.
That's a perfect analogy. And this whole thing with Alice, right? Using a can to tackle Anderson localization, she's not being replaced, she's being empowered, right? It's like this can gave her this new lens through which to study this really complex physics problem.
Exactly. And that's what has these researchers so excited. They're talking about cans ushering in this whole new era of scientific discovery where AI and humans work hand in hand.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the theoretical underpinnings of cans to their potential to really shake things up in fields like knot theory and condensed matter physics.
Yeah, and we've only just scratched the surface. There are still so many open questions and really exciting avenues to explore.
Exactly. Like, what happens when we start thinking about using cans not just to analyze data, but to actually generate new data or to design experiments?
That's a really interesting thought.
It's like we've been focusing on cans as these readers, but what if they could be writers too? Could they help us formulate new hypotheses, unlock new scientific questions we didn't even know to ask?
That is a very tantalizing possibility, and one I'm sure researchers are already starting to explore.
It really makes you wonder where this road leads. So to our listener out there, if you're digging into cans, don't be afraid to get creative. Push those boundaries.
Exactly. Who knows? You might be the one to discover the next big breakthrough, that next aha moment that changes everything.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those possibilities. Until next time, keep diving deep.